For hundreds of years, no ship had returned from the part of the galaxy known as human space. A quiet zone, marked with caution signs on every star map. A region where entire fleets had once vanished without trace, and where no messages ever came back. No wars had been fought there, no battles recorded, and yet, over time, fear grew around it like a dark fog, until even the most curious explorers refused to cross its edge. But now, that silence was being challenged by Selex, a young Trinari diplomat chosen by the Alliance to lead a covert mission into the heart of the unknown. Not for war or conquest, but for answers. The Trinari believed that the time had come to understand the mystery, to seek knowledge, rather than continue fearing a shadow that no one truly understood. And so, Selex boarded the sleek silver ship, Whisperlight, alongside a small crew of scientists and navigators, each of them trained for deep space exploration, each told to keep their mission secret. As they crossed the edge of mapped space, sensors blinked and data flowed, but the moment they passed the invisible line that marked human space, everything changed. First, the stars ahead grew oddly still, as if even light moved more slowly. Here, then the ship's exterior lights flickered despite full power, and all communications with the Alliance cut off with a soft whisper, like a breath exhaled into a void. Inside the ship, tension grew. Whispers replaced voices, and even the humming of the engine seemed quieter, though no one could explain why. It was not a failure of machines, but a change in the space itself, as if the rules here were different. As hours passed with no incident, they grew braver and pushed deeper, passing by silent planets that spun slowly around dim stars. All untouched, all strangely orderly, like they had been placed deliberately rather than formed by nature. Crew member watched their screens with wide eyes, recording everything, trying to understand if they were being watched, or if the silence was just that silence. Selex sat in the captain's chair, eyes fixed on a dark blue planet ahead, when every screen across the ship suddenly turned black. In a low tone filled the air, not loud, not sharp, just a soft, steady pulse, like a heartbeat heard from underwater. Panic began to rise as the ship's lights dimmed, engines slowed, and their artificial gravity shifted ever so slightly, not enough to throw them off balance, but enough to feel wrong. Then everything stopped, the sound, the flickering even. The air seemed still, and for one long minute, not a single crew member could move or speak, as if time itself had held its breath. Then, just as suddenly, the systems rebooted, lights returned, gravity normalized, and the screens lit up with no errors, no data loss, and no sign of what had just happened. One thing was different. The ship had changed course, slightly. Just a few degrees, but enough that the navigator noticed immediately and confirmed that none of them had done it. When they tried to change it back, the system refused, as if the new path had been locked in by something beyond their control. Selex ordered everyone to stay calm, and though their voices trembled, they followed the course without resistance. Partly because curiosity still outweighed fear, and partly because deep inside, none of them believed they had a choice anymore. As they followed the path, new signals began to appear, faint beacons on the edge of their scanners, some shaped like triangles, others like spinning cubes. All too far to identify clearly, but all perfectly spaced, like markers on a road. Someone joked they were being given a tour, but no one laughed, because it felt true. The deeper they went, the more they saw signs of massive construction giant rings floating in orbit around stars. Towers stretching from the surface of moons into space, and satellites shaped like flowers gently spinning without signal or sound. Nothing attacked them, nothing even acknowledged them, and yet the feeling of being watched grew with every passing minute. Then, as they approached the next marker, a soft tone returned, not the heartbeat this time, but a voice, gentle and clear, speaking in perfect Trinari dialect. You have crossed the border, yet you bring no war, no greed, no lies. Continue, and you will see why we chose silence." The crew looked at each other, too stunned to speak, and Selex whispered the only question he could form, "Who are you?" But no answer came, only the silence returning once again. Yet now, the silence felt different, not empty, but full, as if it carried the weight of something waiting just beyond their understanding. And as they followed the path deeper into the unknown, every eye turned forward, every breath held a little longer, and every thought asked the same question: what had humanity become, and why had they vanished into the quiet? The crew of the Whisper Light woke slowly, as if from a strange sleep, their memories foggy, their thoughts heavy, and though none of them had left their posts, the ship's chronometers showed that 4 hours had passed since the last recorded entry. Every clock across the vessel now showed the same unexplained gap. Yet the ship itself remained untouched. No signs of damage, no alerts, and no memory of what had happened. Selex rubbed his temples, trying to recall even a second of that time, but his mind offered only darkness, a still, cold silence, like being underwater too deep to rise. And when he looked around, he saw the same expression on every face: confused, uneasy, but not in pain. The navigation officer reported that they were now in orbit around an unknown planet, not the one they had been heading toward, and even more strange, the ship had shifted positions smoothly, not as if pulled or dragged, but guided by unseen hands. Below them, the world looked calm, covered in vast blue oceans and silver clouds, its land a mix of green and gray, like a painting held in a frame of light. Then, without warning, every console lit up at once, but no alarms sounded instead. A single message appeared across all screens in soft white text: "You are not harmed. You are watched. The path is set." The crew read the message in silence, too surprised to speak. And as Selex opened his mouth to ask for a systems check, the screens cleared and showed a new image, a structure in orbit around a dead star, one they had never seen on any map, shaped like a giant spiral of glass and steel, slowly rotating, releasing soft pulses of light in patterns that looked almost musical. The ship's autopilot engaged again, and once more, the controls ignored their commands. The course was locked in, the engines humming gently, as if the ship itself trusted this new path. "Are we prisoners or guests?" someone whispered. But no one answered, for even Selex didn't know, and something deep in his mind told him to wait, to watch, to listen, 'cause whatever was guiding them wasn't angry, was curious, maybe even welcoming, in its own strange way. As they approached the spiral station, the scanners picked up impossible readings, materials that defied their known charts. Energy signatures older than recorded time, and structures too complex to be natural, but too elegant to be made for war. Tay docked without resistance, a long arm extending from the spiral like a welcoming hand, locking onto the Whisper Light with such precision it felt more like invitation than control. When the doors opened, there was no airlock, no pressure. Shift, only a soft light that spilled into the corridor, and a cool breeze that smelled faintly of rain and stone. Selex stepped out first, followed by the science officer and the ship's historian, each of them holding their breath as they moved forward into a vast chamber with walls made of polished crystal, etched with moving symbols that shimmered as they walked by, changing shape with every step, as if reading their thoughts. In the center of the room stood a tall pillar of black stone, smooth and unmarked, until Selex placed his hand on its hand. Then everything changed. The room darkened, the air warmed, and, above the pillar, a hologram flickered to life, showing stars, ships, voices, and moments in time, not just from Trinari history, but from dozens of species across the galaxy, each one shown in motion, in life, in war, in peace, and in learning, until finally the image shifted to a single blue planet Earth. The name echoed in their minds, though no sound was spoken, and then a voice, clear and calm, filled the air. We watched, we waited, we learned, and when we left, we did not hide, we prepared. The crew stared at the image, seeing flashes of Earth's history, from fire and stone to cities in the stars, from crowded skies to empty silence, and then a sudden quiet, where humanity simply stopped being seen, leaving behind only questions and fear. "Why did you leave?" Selex asked aloud, though he knew the voice was not truly there, only a recording, or perhaps something more. The answer came slowly: to test the galaxy, to see what follows when we step away. Some came to conquer, some to learn, most turned back. You came without weapons, without lies, so we show you more. The hologram vanished, and a new door opened at the far end of the chamber, revealing a long corridor filled with floating lights and shifting symbols, each one showing human achievements, not just of science, but of music, art, and thought poems, written in light, songs encoded in gravity, paintings shaped from living particles that changed as you watched them. It was not a museum, it was a message. Humanity had not vanished, they had evolved in ways the rest of the galaxy could not yet understand, and they had left behind the tools to teach, if others could prove they were ready. As the crew walked deeper into the spiral, each of them saw different things, as if the place was reading their memories and shaping the environment to help them learn. Selig saw a field of stars where time moved slower, and in it he saw humans walking among concepts, not places, building not with hands but with thoughts, shaping reality as easily as a child shapes sand, not for power, but for understanding. The science officer saw machines that thought in music, built not by commands, but by emotion, forming structures out of harmony. The historian saw a story without end, written in motion and silence, where every species that came after humanity would add their own chapter if they chose to do so with respect. And when they returned to the ship, each of them carried a different feeling than fear. Not pride, but a deep, quiet sense of awe. Because they now knew that humanity had become something the galaxy could barely imagine, and they had not closed their borders to hide. They had opened them in a way few would ever understand. By watching in silence, by testing without words, and by waiting for those who would seek not control, but meaning. Back aboard the Whisper Light, the screens now showed only one line. You asked, we showed. Now ask again, if you are ready. Selex looked out at the spiral, then at the stars beyond, and whispered, what happens next? Knowing that whatever came, the galaxy would never be the same again. The ship Whisper Light floated in quiet orbit above the strange spiral station, its crew still shaken by what they had seen inside the voice, the visions, the gentle but powerful feeling that something far beyond them had taken notice. Selex stood at the front observation window, staring into the stars, his thoughts heavy with questions, wondering what the next step would be when the ship lights dimmed again, not from failure, but as if adjusting to something greater arriving. Then, in the main chamber of the vessel, a new signal appeared, not a warning, not a command, but a soft pulse of sound and light, guiding them to return to the station. With quiet nods, they followed, stepping once more into the smooth crystal hall, where the pillar they had seen before now glowed with a deeper color, and the moment Selex touched it, the room changed into a sky full of memories. Above them stretched the image of a planet with blue oceans and white clouds. The name Earth glowing faintly in the air, and around it spun moments, frozen in time. A soft voice filled the space, no longer only a recording, but something that felt aware, present, perhaps even alive, and it spoke simply. You wish to understand why we left? Then you must understand who we were. The room darkened and became a spinning globe, showing Earth's rise from ancient forests to glowing cities, from stone tools to machines of thought, and the crew watched in silence as they saw war, peace, music, struggle, hope, and endless reaching a species that never stopped moving forward, always chasing questions no one else dared to ask. They saw Earth's people reach the stars, build colonies, share trade with other worlds, and even join galactic councils, only to grow quiet again, more distant, more thoughtful, until one day they disappeared, not with war, not with disease, but by choice. We saw enough, the voice continued, not only of ourselves, but of others. We gave, we learned, we watched, and then we stepped back, not to hide, but to prepare. The room shifted, and now they saw deep space, where massive structures floated between stars, rings built around suns, time-bending stations, and silent machines that shaped light into thought. Humanity had not gone extinct. They had evolved into something else, something quieter, choosing not to rule or control, but to observe, to wait, and to test. The galaxy repeats, the voice said. It builds and breaks, builds and breaks. So we broke the pattern. We left signs, we left warnings, and we waited for those who would come not with fear or conquest, but with patience. Silix watched as Earth itself faded from view, replaced by vast halls filled with art, languages, dreams preserved, not for pride, but as gifts. And then came a surprise, a vision of the Trinari homeworld, not from the present, but from decades ago, as seen by human explorers who had once walked there in secret, watching kindly, never interfering, always learning. We never forgot you, the voice said. We never erased you, simply waited to see who you would become. One of the crew gasped as the scene changed again, showing the first time the Trinari Council had discussed human space, how they had hesitated, feared it, misunderstood it, and how humans had predicted it all. Not out of arrogance, but out of understanding that most species need fear before they choose respect. We are not gods, the voice said. We are not ghosts. We are memory made alive and choice made real. Then, slowly, the floating symbols around the room began to turn toward the crew, shaping themselves into questions. What will you carry back? What will you tell others? Will they listen, or will they turn away? Celix felt the weight of those questions settle in his heart. This was not about technology or secrets or gaining power. It was about proving that the galaxy could grow up, that it could learn without being forced, and that some things were worth protecting by simply stepping away. The crew stood still, watching as the station dimmed again, and the voice spoke one final time. You have been shown the memory of Earth, not the whole, only the part we chose to leave behind. There is more, but only for those who will understand it in time. Return and speak, listen and choose. We'll still be here, watching, waiting, ready. And with that, the crystal walls faded into clear glass, showing stars stretching endlessly in every direction, as if to remind them that this was only the beginning of something far greater than they had known. Back on the Whisper Light, the ship's systems came alive on their own, guiding them gently away from the spiral, back toward the edge of human space, carrying with them a message, not of warning, but of possibility. And as Celix looked once more toward the place Earth had been, now hidden in the dark, he whispered a silent promise not to misuse what they had learned, but to become something worthy of it. As the Whisper Light drifted quietly through the edge of human space, heading back toward known regions, the crew sat in silence, each member deep in thought, their minds heavy with everything they had seen: Earth, memory, the spiral station, the strange voice that spoke not with orders, but with purpose. And, though the ship moved steadily, none of them felt safe, not because of danger, but because something unseen had changed inside them, as if they had stepped through a door that could never be closed again. Silex stood alone on the command deck, watching the stars slide past, when suddenly, without warning, the ship stopped. No alarm, no impact, just a soft halt, as if space itself had turned thick. Hey, and before anyone could speak, the lights flickered. Once, then went dim, and every screen on the ship turned black, showing only a single symbol, a spiral, like the station they had visited, glowing faintly in blue. Then came the voice again, the same one they had heard before, gentle, calm, but now with a different tones, slower, quieter, almost thoughtful, and it said, "You have seen. Now you must be seen." The lights turned soft white, and a new screen appeared on the front wall, showing an empty black room with no doors, no windows, only a single chair in the center. Silex didn't wait for orders. He stepped into the lift as it opened and followed the lighted path down into the lower deck, where the chamber now stood, real and waiting, though it hadn't existed before. He entered alone, sat down in the chair, and waited, the silence pressing around him like deep water. And then the voice returned, not from the walls, this time, but from inside his head, quiet and direct. "This is the test, not of strength, not of mind, but of self. Answer, and be known." Silex closed his eyes, and suddenly his memories flashed before him, not just thoughts, but feelings, choices, every lie he'd ever told, every truth he'd feared, and every moment of doubt or kindness or failure he'd ever experienced, shown not as judgment, but as pieces of who he was. He felt his heart race, not from fear, but from exposure. Something was looking inside him, not with anger, but with understanding. And every memory was being weighed, not for right or wrong, but for intent, for reason, for depth. The voice asked him questions without words. "Why do you lead? Why did you come? Would you still have come if you knew there was no reward?" And Silex answered without speaking, letting the truth rise in him. Even the pieces he had buried, he had come not just for discovery, but because he feared what would happen if no one else did. He had led because he believed someone had to, even if he felt unworthy, and he had always wondered what waited in the dark places where others turned back. The voice fell silent, and the room slowly faded, returning him to the lift, where he found his crew waiting. Each of them had gone through their own test. Each of them changed, though none spoke of what they had seen, 'cause it was not meant to be shared, only understood. Then, without instruction, the ship moved again, but not backward, not toward the Alliance, but deeper into human space, along a path of lights now forming ahead like stepping stones. The crew said nothing, because they understood now that they were still being watched, not for harm, but for truth. And they all felt the same thing, that their mission had never been about reaching Earth or discovering old human technology, but about proving what they were when no one was looking, when no one expected reward or recognition. As the ship followed the path, they saw other vessels in the distance, not alive, not moving, but preserved, frozen in place like statues, each one marked with symbols they didn't recognize, and each one broken in a different way. Silex knew what they worships that had come before, species that had entered human space not to learn, but to take, or deceive, or test with violence, and each had failed. Not because of human weapons, but because of the quiet test, the silent mirror, that showed what was hidden inside. Now, Silex understood why no one ever returned, because most had failed without even knowing there had been a test at all. But Whisper Light moved forward, untouched, not because they were perfect, but because they had dared to be honest, to be open, and to accept what they could not control. As they neared the edge of a strange, glowing ring, far larger than any structure they had seen, the voice returned for the last time, speaking not just in words, but in emotion, in feeling, you were tested. Not for knowledge, but for intent. You are not the first, but you are the first to pass this far. What comes next is choice not ours, but yours. Speak of what you saw, or remain silent. Act with wisdom, or with fear. The door will not close, but its weight will always remain. The ring ahead opened slowly, revealing a star system unlike any on their charts, with planets shaped like spirals, moons that glowed with soft light, and, in the center, a quiet, blue planet Earth, untouched, peaceful, surrounded by fields of energy that moved like tides. Cilix and his crew watched in silence, knowing they were the first in centuries to see it, and knowing that they were not meant to land. Not yet, maybe not ever. The planet was not a prize, was a reminder, a symbol of what could be if power was not abused, if knowledge was not twisted, if patience was stronger than pride. The whisper light turned gently on its own, guided once more by unseen hands, and began its return journey. Not in defeat, but in quiet triumph, carrying a truth that would shape their people forever, that the humans had not vanished in fear or arrogance, but had built a test the galaxy never knew it was taking, and that test was still going on, silent and deep. In the dark between stars, the whisper light sailed back through human space, guided not by maps, but by the quiet pull of something larger than the stars, something the crew could feel but not explain. And though they had seen wonders beyond belief, planet untouched, tests of the soul, memories older than their own history, none of it compared to the strange sense of waiting that filled the ship now. As if a question long buried was about to be answered, and they were only moments from hearing it. Cilix stood again at the front, his hands behind his back, his thoughts sharper than ever, because he understood now that they had not just passed through space, they had passed through judgment. And though the test had been silent, the outcome was loud in its meaning. They had been accepted, not praised, not rewarded, but seen as worthy to continue forward. But as the ship neared the very center of human space, a place no map had ever shown, a presence returned, not a voice, not a machine, but a feeling. It's like someone watching with quiet approval, and suddenly the ship stopped once more, just as it had before, with no warning, no command, only stillness. And ahead of them stood a structure unlike any other, not built from metal or stone, but from light itself, woven together into a vast shape that bent space around it like water. Without a word, the ship opened its side, creating a bridge of solid light toward the glowing hull, and the crew walked across, silent, hearts pounding, each step like a whisper into history, because deep inside, they knew this was it, the heart, the answer. The moment where everything would make sense or collapse into silence forever. Inside the hall was a single chamber, and at its center floated a sphere of pure light, shifting through colors, pulsing like a heartbeat. And when Cilix approached, it spoke not with sound, but through emotion, thoughts placed directly into his mind, calm and strong. You have seen the test, passed the gate, and walked the edge of truth. Here the answer humanity left behind. The sphere pulsed once, and the room filled with images, not of Earth's fall, but of its choice. Humanity had not left the galaxy because it feared others, or because it wished to rule secretly, but because it saw a pattern it could not change. By force, civilizations rose, grew powerful, and then collapsed from greed, pride, fear. They repeated this again and again, learning nothing, listening to no one. But humanity, older than most believed, had stepped away, not in retreat, but in faith that one day someone would come not to take, but to understand, and that someone or someones had finally come. The Whisper-like crew had proven what humanity had waited centuries to see, that the galaxy could grow beyond fear, beyond war, beyond ego. And now the final piece was ready to be given. The Sphere's light grew stronger, and it began to divide into smaller shapes, seed to want to see. Not of matter, but of memory, knowledge, and intent. These, the voice said, are the keys to what we became: understanding beyond science, unity beyond language, peace beyond silence. You may take them, but they are not weapons, and they cannot be forced. They are ideas, and ideas must be chosen, not commanded. Celix reached out, touched one of the seeds, and instantly his mind filled with understanding, not facts or figures, but truths. How to build thought ships powered by will, how to calm a storm with music, how to speak across galaxies without machines, how to teach a world to grow without pain. It was overwhelming, beautiful, and terrifying, because it showed not only what humanity had learned, but what the galaxy could still become if it dared to let go of fear. As the crew each took a seed, the chamber pulsed warmly, like a heartbeat of approval. And the voice whispered one last time, "Now you are the answer, not just a question." The hall began to fade, returning them to their ship, and the path behind them slowly closed, not to trap them, but to protect what had not yet been earned by others. The Whisperer light turned and began its journey home, this time with no more stops, no more tests, only silence and stars. But in that silence, Celix knew everything had changed, not just for them, not just for their people, but for the galaxy, because now someone would speak the truth, and others would have to listen, and maybe, just maybe, the age of waiting was over. The Whisper light emerged from the edge of human space with no fanfare, no noise, and no escort, but the moment it crossed the invisible line into known territory, the galaxy noticed not just a signal on a scanner or a ship appearing on a map, but a deep, quiet ripple that passed through every system, as if something had shifted in the very air of the stars. And though no alarms rang, strange hush spread through the great halls of the Trinari Alliance, the mind spires of the Varen, and even the distant listening posts of the cold-blooded Solari, because all of them felt something they could not explain, like a long-held breath finally released. Celix and his crew did not speak as they neared the nearest Alliance outpost, their minds still full of the memory seeds they carried, and though the data they had could not be hacked or copied, the feeling it carried, the truth it held pressed on their hearts like sunlight on ice, melting away old fears they hadn't even known were there. The station hailed them once, twice, then 10 times, voices sharp with tension, asking where they had gone, what they had seen, if they had encountered human systems, human weapons, human threats. But Celix answered with only one sentence: "We bring no danger, only understanding." And he asked for a place to speak, not just with leaders, but with the galaxy itself. The request was strange, but something in his voice made them agree, and within days, the Trinari Council arranged a gathering like none before. Ambassadors, historians, thinkers, and even old warriors sat together in a great dome on neutral Moon 7, surrounded by light and silence, waiting for words that had not been spoken for centuries. When Celix walked into the hall, he looked smaller than the myths that had already begun to form around his name. But his eyes held something vast, something everyone there recognized: not power, not pride, but calm. He did not bring weapons, or threats, or demands, only the truth, the kind that could not be bought or forced, only shared. He spoke of the spiral station, of the silent test, the echoing voice of Earth, and of the seeds they had been given, not as rewards, but as choices. And every word he said felt heavier than the air, because deep down, everyone listening knew it fit, like a puzzle they had never finished until now. Questions rose like fire. Why had humans vanished? Why had they never returned? Why had they allowed the galaxy to fear them instead of explaining themselves? And Celix answered every question with the same idea: humanity had not left out of fear, but out of hope that one day others would grow enough to ask without trying to take. A silence followed, not empty, but thick with thought. And then, something rare happened. One of the oldest variants stood, species known for doubt and distance, and he simply bowed his head, not in surrender, but in respect, and slowly others followed, not because of force, but because they understood what had been shown. From that day on, everything changed. Ships that once circled human space with suspicion now waited at the edge, hoping for guidance. The old stories of ghosts and vanished war fleets were replaced with questions, with study, with wonder, and, across the stars, those who had once sought power began to speak more carefully, think more deeply, and act more slowly, not because they feared humanity's return, but because they feared disappointing the hope humanity had left behind. The seeds that Cilix and his crew carried were not unlocked all at once. They took time, thought, patience, but slowly they began to bloom in minds across worlds, unlocking new ways to think, to build, to live. And those who at once ruled by force now studied in silence, humbled by the knowledge that they had almost never been ready at all. And as the years passed, children grew up hearing a new story, not of a species that vanished in pride, but of one that had seen everything and still believed others could rise. And somewhere, far in the dark, where the stars bend around old machines and quiet stations still turn, the Watchers, the true descendants of Earth, waited and watched, not with judgment, but with hope, because, at last, the galaxy had begun to understand.